Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Ben, your host. Happy to be with you. I'm a naturopathic doctor specializing in whole food plant based nutrition, as well as mind body medicine. And this week on the podcast, we're talking about a lot of things that have been on my mind and kind of coming up in recurrent themes for sure over the last 3 years, but more so recently as we are in the midst of quote unquote cold and flu season, right? So we're going to be talking about germ theory, terrain theory, that sort of stuff. We're also going to be talking about the symptoms we might commonly experience, cold and flu like symptoms, and how to relate with them. And really bringing in this topic of detoxification and understanding our body as self healing organisms and seeing those symptoms as healthy, as getting healthy. And as I was kind of thinking about today's conversation, I was reflecting on a time. Hopefully, this isn't too much information. I think I've shared a little bit about this in past episodes. But the first time I drank ayahuasca, which is a hallucinogenic substance, a brew that's a traditional plant medicine in the jungle in South America. There was this talk around like purging and vomiting, and how purging or vomiting was getting well. People would refer to that act during ayahuasca journey as getting well. And I remember thinking that, like, well, throwing up is getting well. What the heck are these guys talking about? What the heck is this shaman talking about? But in any event, I was like, okay, yeah, I can get behind that. And fast forward throughout, my naturopathic medical education and learning about the self-healing body and how the symptoms that we express and experience are signs of us moving into health. That is, of course, unless we suppress those symptoms with things like, in the case of vomiting, an antiemetic or a nausea reducer, or maybe a decongestant to dry up our mucus, or a cough suppressant to suppress our coughing, or an antipyretic to lower our fever. All of these drugs or medications or even supplements that can be used to counter symptoms and suppress symptoms. So back to this experience of like getting well through vomiting. I now and it didn't take me that long to understand, like, oh yeah, this is natural, this is healthy. And of course, in the context of like an ayahuasca journey or something like that, it is not only maybe like the detoxification from whatever was triggered from ingesting that substance, but of course, there is the energetic, emotional, spiritual cleanse that is very real. And for anyone who has had that sort of experience, they probably know what I'm talking about. But in any event, I want to talk, don't want to talk about the plant medicine, psychedelic hallucinogenic stuff, even though that could be a fun topic for another time. I want to talk about the more common symptoms that we human beings invariably experience over the course of our development as children, but really over the course of our lives. And that's the experience of acute symptoms: a runny nose, a cough, a sneeze, a sore throat, congestion, sinus pressure, headaches. All of these things that maybe get really scary or intense, and maybe lead us to seek medical treatment or intervention. And by all means, I'm not suggesting that we kind of brush off these symptoms as just like no big deal. Sometimes they can be serious and warrant medical intervention. That being said, it helps to understand really fundamentally the truth of what's going on in our bodies for a couple of reasons. One, so that we can just be more grounded and in a state of peace and harmony to allow our self-healing potential to more predominantly flourish and dominate and dictate our human experience of health. But more importantly, it kind of, be in a place of empowerment with our health and not in a place of fear. Um, and I guess it's important to also consider like the truth of what's going on. Is there in fact a invisible enemy or germ or bug that is causing our symptoms? Or are our symptoms just a natural phenomenon, a process of detoxification, maybe from some external insult that we may have experienced, whether it's a bug or whether it's some other source of environmental toxicity or whatever, or maybe it's just kind of a developmental shift that is going on in our body. And that whatever the case may be, whatever the cause might be, we can relate to these symptoms in a way that allows these symptoms to express themselves naturally as a healthy part of our process. So of course, like in the post COVID world, as I like to see it, a lot of people have become hyper vigilant around the nature of germs in our environment and germs causing disease. And interestingly, ironically, in naturopathic medical education, I don't want to go deep into my experience and that rabbit hole too much. But the fact of the matter is that there's like a real balance in the training, which I guess some could say like, oh, that's great, to have an understanding of terrain theory, the importance of the immune system and a healthy functional body that processes toxicity and cleanses itself. But also, of course, we learn about immunology and the presence of viruses and bacteria and pathogens that mount an immune response, and the importance of protecting ourselves against these sort of foreign invaders. And fast forward to now, over the course of the last few years around COVID stuff, I have really personally started to dig into kind of more deeply critically thinking around the presence of viruses causing disease. And of course, I'm talking about the terrain theory, really embracing that more fully rather than just like balancing this terrain, like, oh yeah, this terrain works and this terrain is important, but the germs, yeah, I got to be careful and afraid of them. The fact is that what the science or lack thereof that I have found in my investigation is that germs very rarely, if not ever, cause disease. And of course, I'm talking about, for those who don't know, again, I'm not going to go too deep into this. That's not the point of this conversation. But there's a phenomenon called the Koch's postulates that are required to meet in order to determine whether or not an agent, whether it's a germ or bacteria or whatever, causes symptoms. So that agent needs to be isolated and then reintroduced into a healthy subject, a healthy host, to cause reproducible symptoms. And the fact of the matter is that just simply doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. First of all, it's very difficult, and some say impossible, to isolate a so-called quote unquote virus. And then if that is isolated, injecting that or getting that into a healthy host and reproducing symptoms simply doesn't happen. So it really calls into question any validity around the so-called germ theory. So that I'm just in a state of taking in information and personally just sharing my open-mindedness with you all. But where was I going with that? The fact of the matter is that, if the stuff and the fact of the matter is that really embracing the terrain theory helps us to understand and explain what we observe in our world, in our physical world reality. Because I'm sure if you're anything like any of the, millions, billions of people who've experienced people around them getting sick, you start to scratch your head and question, like, okay, is there some transmissible infectious agent that's causing people to get sick? I know for myself, for instance, I've been not locked up, but enclosed in close quarters with people who are coughing and sneezing for days or weeks. And and sometimes I do catch a, runny nose. I caught myself there. I don't catch it. Sometimes I do experience a runny nose or, a sore throat or something like that. But more often than not, my experience of health is totally independent of the people I'm exposed to. And that's not because I'm hyper vigilant around washing my hands or wearing, face coverings or taking, crazy immune boosting supplements or anything like that. In my experience, bugs simply are not transmissible. But that being said, I hear stories of kids going to daycare and whatnot and just like catching everything and then rubbing, just always getting sick, always getting sick, always spreading things to their little playmates and whatnot. But that there's also reasons why kids get sick more often, and it has a lot to do with the developmental stages that those little people are going through. And the quote unquote sickness that they might experience is in fact a sign of healthy development of their organs and systems and detoxification pathways and whatnot. So that's so again, if either way you want to look at it, it really starts to call into question the presence of infectious agents and the ability of those so-called infectious agents to really be transmissible and cause disease in and of themselves. And again, just embracing and understanding terrain theory helps us to understand and make sense of what we naturally observe in our physical world reality. Because the fact is that, yes, maybe two people living in the same household get symptoms at the same time, but there's reasons for that beyond the presence of an infectious agent. There's energetic and emotional reasons, there's environmental exposure reasons, there's food and nutritional reasons. There's a lot of reasons that some people might be experiencing the symptoms that they do that span beyond the world of germ theory. So, and the last thing I'll say for now about germ theory is that, the fact is that that theory is part of the way I see it, is part of a big agenda to fight something. And it's just another fight against something. If you are, can consider like the fight against terrorism, the fight against drugs, the fight against crime, the fight against bacteria, the fight against viruses or foreign invaders or pathogens. And in our experience of fighting against anything like that, it simply doesn't work, even if even if it is even if viruses or bacteria or whatever do exist and cause disease and symptoms, like fighting them simply doesn't work. We have to work with them and develop relationship and harmony and understanding. We can't just fight things because we know, like for instance, fighting terrorism and crime and drugs, that just kind of creates more terrorism, crime, and drugs, right? We've got to have a deeper understanding relationship. And the other point is that when we are in the context of medicine, fighting something that's invisible and outside of ourselves, it allows us to be in a state, or it doesn't allow us to, but it promotes the state of fear and this agenda or narrative that we need something to help us fight the invisible enemy outside of ourselves. And of course, that thing that we need is Big Pharma. And the way I see it is that Big Pharma is really the entity, and of course, it's a huge entity. I believe truly controlling the world, and through controlling the world, controlling the narrative, controlling the fear based narrative, and really brainwashing people to think that they need something outside of themselves in order to stay safe and healthy. And that's simply not true, as far as I know and as far as I understand a healthy human body. So, let's talk about the symptoms that we might experience, the common kind of cold and flu like symptoms. And in the context of terrain theory and detoxification, what these symptoms are, what they represent, and how to relate with them and promote a healthy flow of self-healing potential in our body so that we can maintain our health and resilience through allowing that detoxification process rather than suppressing the detoxification process, and therefore potentially contributing to more chronic conditions that may manifest or fester within ourselves. With regard, it's really kind of straightforward with regard to the cold and flu-like symptoms, whether it's a sore throat or a runny nose or sinus congestion or headache or or fatigue or just any of those vague symptoms that are really universal. It's, where one could say that we're mounting an immune response. Now that's a whole other rabbit hole wrapped into the conversation of germ theory and terrain theory. What exactly is the immune system? But in any event, that immune system, that immune response that we might mount, involves the production of, different substances and the breakdown of cells, and more importantly, the excretion of those substances from the body through our mucus, whether it's through our nose, our throat, our butts, or our mouths, or wherever else. And the fact is that we can allow this flow to flow. We can allow the flow to flow rather than treating or fixing or suppressing the flow. It doesn't take any sort of rocket science thinking to think like, okay, if we are mounting this quote unquote immune response, which is involving detoxification, and we stop that detoxification immune response, then we hold on to the toxicity that our bodies are trying to expel. And yeah, we might clear up our runny nose, and we might have clear up our cough or decongest our cough, and we might lower our fever. But meanwhile, our body is accumulating toxicity, for lack of a more precise term. And that toxicity, of course, as we know, as it relates to more chronic conditions, manifests as the expression or as the experience of chronic conditions. And again, just as we observe the state of our physical world reality, we live in a world where, yes, acute conditions come up and people have runny noses and sore throats, and people go to the doctors and get their medications or their antibiotics to treat those acute things. But the bigger, more important, more serious issue that most people are struggling with are the chronic conditions that are festering. And I guess my argument here is that they are festering and manifesting because we are continually, not we, like you and I, but generally speaking, society is in a perpetual state of suppressing those symptoms, suppressing our body's ability to detoxify itself, therefore allowing the toxicity within our body to build and overflow in the experience of more chronic conditions. So of course, when talking about the whole toxicity conversation, we need to also consider the influx of toxicity from our environment, because the fact is that we do have a lot of exogenous toxins that are outside of ourselves, in our food, in our air, in our water, that we must be mindful of. And eating clean, eating low on the food chain, drinking purified water, having an air filtration system, being in nature, all of these things are great ways to lower or mitigate our toxic load from exogenous toxins. But even if we're in a sterile environment, even if we're in a pure or pristine mountain air and just, spring water, and just eating the most pristine, pure food, even if we're in that perfect, ideal environment, we still are creating endogenous toxins. So that's why, yes, like human beings are acutely ill here in the 2023. But if we rewind history back to the beginning of time, where we were in that pristine environment, where there wasn't, chemtrails and stuff in pharmaceutical products and all sorts of heavy metals in our environment and whatnot, people still got sick and there was still illness acutely. But of course, the understanding and relationship to it was very different. But the fact is that we are imperfect human beings, in the sense that we create toxicity naturally in a healthy natural body. We create toxicity endogenously. Therefore, detoxification is an inborn natural product to balance that toxicity equation, so that we don't kind of continually build up and then develop more serious and chronic conditions like quote unquote autoimmunity or cancer and so on and so forth. So again, if we just look back in time, and there's a lot, I don't want to go too far off track in my thinking, but if we go back in time, like cancers and autoimmunity and all sorts of things, like these more chronic like common modern conditions that a lot of people are suffering with, they weren't really a thing. And some people might say, oh yeah, well, they weren't a thing because people weren't living as long. They weren't a thing because we didn't have the diagnostic equipment or technology to assess or to test for these things. But I think we can all agree that the rate of chronic disease, like irrespective of health of lifespan, rather, is totally on the incline and has been for throughout the modern age, say the last 100 years or so. And like it's really kind of sad and pathetic considering the concurrent rate of technologic advancements and understanding of quote unquote scientific ideas and theories. And it's like, why do we have this concurrent rise of chronic disease along with all the modern amazing things that are taking place in our world? And it's really easy to see why we have this modern rise in disease. And I'm just going to say it in like two words. It can be explained in two words, and that is toxicity up, nutrition down. Toxicity up, nutrient status down. And the increase in toxicity and the decrease in nutrient status in human nutrition is really creating the perfect storm for chronic conditions. And then to exacerbate all of that, back to the kind of the point of this episode and the point of healthy, what's the name of this again? Getting sick is healthy detoxification. Excuse me, getting sick is healthy detoxification. So to exacerbate the toxicity rise and the nutrient status decline, when we do experience the natural phenomenon of quote unquote getting sick, we have this tendency to be in a state of fear. We're told that we need to treat that or suppress that or prevent that. And that allows the toxicity to rise even further. Not to mention all the other maybe the impacts of the nervous system from being in that state of fear, from being in a disempowered, confused state where we need something, whether it's some pharmaceutical product or anything else, to mitigate or fix that symptom. In historically speaking, when humans got sick, they would just be sick and then rest in bed for a day or two, or maybe a week, or maybe a month. And then on the other side of sickness, assuming that they survived, they'd be better. And yet, maybe medical intervention has allowed the more seriously ill people to survive, but at the expense of creating this huge epidemic of chronic lifestyle and chronic iatrogenic or pharmaceutically induced illness. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to share, I believe. Oh yeah, I've got another note here. Think about a lot and I don't talk about quite enough is, I was kind of going down that rabbit hole around like the big pharma infiltration of the medical education system and the media system, and big pharma essentially controlling the world. And for anyone who's more interested on that, it's just like, what the heck is Dr. Ben talking about? Like, does he have any information to back up this bold statement, like big pharma controlling the world? Whoa. But a very interesting rabbit hole to go down is looking at and studying the Flexner report. The Flexner report, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. You can go down yourself, but it's essentially the way in which the pharmaceutical companies took control of medical education, and that control is still held by big pharma. And in my experience, and I have called it out before and have been ridiculed for doing so, the big pharma control of medical education has spanned beyond just quote unquote conventional medicine. Naturopathic and chiropractic institutions, as far as I know firsthand, at least my naturopathic medical school has been infiltrated by big pharma. It's taking funds from big pharma. And it's just really sad that big pharma is controlling the whole world through controlling medical education. And of course, when they control medical education, then they control what you learn and the theories. So it's I always feel like um, it's honestly difficult for me to question what I've learned in medical school. And like I said, I have been questioning more and more the whole phenomenon and paradigm of germ versus terrain, and what the heck is the immune system? What is it doing for me? And even though I have such an open mind, there's nothing for me to grasp onto except for my notes around, conventional immunology that I learned. So I feel like I'm kind of in a state of free fall and totally unknowing and unlearning and relearning and kind of just figuring stuff out, knowing that a lot of, not everything, but a lot of what I've been fed through my education has been curated by Big Pharma. And again, that doesn't mean that everything needs to be thrown out, but it does mean that everything needs to be critically questioned from a clean, open mind, one that hasn't been infiltrated and contaminated by all of the greed and corruption that is endemic in Big Pharma. So I guess that's enough ranting and raving. And honestly, I went a little bit more off in that direction than I intended. But hopefully, I think that you all already knew or know where I stand in my understanding and relationship with pharmaceutical products, and really how important it is for us human beings to take responsibility of health. And before I wrap up today, I did just want to hit on one more like a consideration for you, a consideration for you to live your life and live as an example of health. And I just sometimes think about, I was actually just, it was brought to my awareness when I was talking with someone on the phone the other day, like what a different world it would be if like we all had this understanding of the self-healing regenerative potential that we all naturally harness, and like how different of a world it would be if like what if we all knew that back in the beginning of 2020 when the news came on and told us about a quote unquote deadly pandemic that was sweeping the world. What if we all knew that we actually had the ability to create resilient health and we didn't have anything to fear that was outside of ourselves? What if we actually knew that from the get-go? I know a lot of people have been waking up to that fact along the past few years, and hopefully when round 2.0 comes, or whatever, round 3, whatever it is, we'll be more grounded in a state of empowerment and in a state of trust of our body's ability to heal and maintain health, and not be so um, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not be so so easily swayed by the narrative that, let's face it, is very fear-based. So that's my vision. That's why I'm kind of opening up and hopefully like inspiring or helping you to maybe do the same, to be that example and to share, empowering information, to live from a place of trust and understanding rather than from a place of confusion and fear and overwhelm. I think that in and of itself can and will change the world. So if this message resonates, if this information resonates, if you feel like you want to share it, feel free to send this conversation, or this, I guess it wasn't a conversation, it was just a little rant. Send it to a loved one, a friend, someone who is starting to wake up and smell the coffee, or wake up and smell reality, as I like to say. Before, the last thing I'll say is just for anyone who does want to learn more about lifestyle medicine, about food as medicine, we have our kind of flagship course. We're also working on a number of other things at Alter Health. Our flagship course offering is Thrive on Plants. It's really everything you need to know about nutritional science and taking care of yourself to heal yourself and create that resilient health and that quote unquote healthy immune system and healthy detoxification pathways, and everything like that. So you can head to www.alter.health/thrive on plants to learn more. And if that's not in what you're looking for right now, you're looking for maybe just a little bit more regular support and inspiration on a smaller scale, you don't need the big education, our meal guide membership is a great option. This is just a way to get a delivery into a digital delivery, not a physical delivery to your doorstep, but a digital delivery to your email inbox of healing recipes each and every week, things that you can whip up in your kitchen and create your healthy resilience and in your own world, because that you're the only person that can do that, right? There's no one else that can do that except for you. So that's it for now. Thanks again for being with me and for hearing me. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Peace and love.